using high-risk food guidance to help you or your service users enjoy meals more safely. High-risk foods are foods that are difficult to chew and swallow safely because of their texture. Someone with an eating and drinking difficulty can have problems at different stages of their swallow. High-risk foods can increase the risk of choking, which can be very distressing for everyone involved. In extreme cases, it can lead to unnecessary medical interventions or even death. High-risk foods can also put the person at risk of aspiration. This is food or drink going down the wrong way into your lungs. This can lead to chest infections, serious illness, and in extreme cases, death. Sometimes a speech and language therapist may advise you to be careful of or even completely avoid offering high-risk foods. Any decision about changes to someone's diet has to take into account the person in question, their needs, abilities, and preferences. Some service users may have eating and drinking guidelines in place. Always consult the guidelines. Make sure that any staff or family members supporting the service user with their meal is aware of best practice around this person's eating and drinking. We all want our meal times to be enjoyable. The flavour and texture of our foods are important to us. If people find it hard to manage certain textures, it may have an impact on their anxiety levels, enjoyment, and motivation to eat and drink. If you are concerned about high-risk foods or you've been advised they aren't suitable for you or the person you support, here are some helpful pointers. When you are considering what high-risk foods are, people can tend to think in black and white and completely ban certain foods without thinking about whether they could be adapted to make them safer. There are some foods that are high risk and there's very little you can do to modify the texture, apart from maybe trying to puree the food. Take for example bacon. Bacon is considered high risk because even when it's cut into small pieces, it is hard, tough, and can be gristly and fatty. Foods with this kind of texture should be avoided if you're avoiding high-risk foods. You can sometimes swap foods or adapt the texture to give people a flavour of the food or to allow people to include it in their diet in a different form. This requires some out-of-the-box thinking. Sometimes cutting food into bite-sized pieces can help people manage more safely. IDSI recommend 1.5 by 1.5 centimetre pieces of food. This is roughly the size of your thumbnail. This size is recommended because even if something goes down the wrong way, at this size it should pass through your airway rather than completely blocking it. A helpful tool for thinking about high-risk foods is the High-Risk Foods poster from the Belfast Trust. This poster lists some textures and examples of different foods that demonstrate these textures. We're going to spend a bit of time looking at each of the sections from this poster and think about why they might be considered high risk. We will also think about whether foods can be modified to make them safer. What is a hard food? Hard foods are usually foods that involve biting and chewing and can take a while to chew. Nuts and hard-boiled sweets are listed on the poster. Hard foods can include some raw fruit and vegetables. Hard-boiled sweets and raw nuts cannot be modified and should be swapped for something more suitable. There are some hard foods that can be made safer by cooking, for example vegetables and fruit. These carrots are softer and easier to manage now they have been boiled. Crumbly foods are things like biscuits, pie crusts, and flaky pastry. Crumbly foods tend to be dry, they can be hard to control in your mouth as they break into small pieces. They can also stick to the roof of your mouth. Some crumbly foods can be softened by heating or adding thick liquids. Others, such as flaky pastry, will not change their texture even with added moisture and should be removed or substituted with something more suitable. Pips, seeds, pith, skins, or outer shell. You can find these inside and outside fruit and veg. You can make this texture safer by removing the pips, seeds, pith and skin and any shells where possible. There are some fruits and vegetables where it is nearly impossible to achieve this. For example, sweet corn. Some people need to avoid these types of foods altogether. Tough foods are things like steak, tough meats, and some sweets. Slow cooking and cooking foods in a pressure cooker can tenderize meat. Skin, bone, and gristle can be tough, chewy, slippery, and very dangerous if offered to someone who is avoiding high-risk foods. You can avoid these by buying skinless and boneless meat and fish. Tender, better quality cuts of meat don't usually have any gristle or fatty pieces. Removing thicker vegetable skins before or after cooking can also make them more manageable. For example, baked potato. Sticky foods can be difficult to manage in your mouth. They can get stuck to your teeth and palate. They include foods like peanut butter and sweets including marshmallows, toffees and caramel. Sticky foods can be replaced with something that's easier to manage. You can sometimes modify some sticky textures by heating and adding liquids. For example, porridge. Juicy foods tend to break apart in your mouth, which can make them slippery and hard to manage. Melon and other kinds of very juicy fruits, like pineapple, are considered high risk. Some of these foods can be modified by draining the juice or mashing the food down and adding it to a thick yogurt. Round or long-shaped foods include foods like sausages and grapes. In order to avoid round or long-shaped foods, think about how you are serving the food. Can you modify the food by cutting it into 1.5 cm by 1.5 cm pieces? Remember to think about any skins on these foods. For example, these skinless sausages are easier to manage than sausages with skins left on. Dry foods include foods such as crackers and some types of cakes and bread. Dry food can be tricky because they can crumble up in your mouth. Some dry foods can be modified by adding liquid such as cream or custard. Others won't change their texture such as crackers. Think carefully about the textures and whether adding liquids helps them hold their shape more effectively. Adding moisture can help. For example, dunking biscuits in tea, which helps the dry particles stick together. Crispy food can behave in the same way as dry foods. The small pieces can break off and they can be difficult to manage in your mouth. Think about what foods you can substitute for crispy or crunchy foods, or whether adding liquids will change the texture. For example, corn snacks can be easier to manage rather than potato crisps. Stringy or fibrous foods include foods such as raw celery and raw pineapple. These can be tricky as they can get stuck in your teeth and the stringiness can be difficult to manage. You could try to modify them, for example by pureeing them and adding them to food or cutting them into tiny pieces, cooking them and adding them to a meat or vegetable dish. Floppy foods can be food such as thinly sliced cucumber and leafy salad. These foods can be difficult to get into your mouth and then safely chew and swallow them. Consider healthy alternatives to salads, such as well-cooked skinless root vegetables or adding extra vegetables to slow-cooked meals. Solid foods sitting in liquid can be difficult to manage in your mouth. For example, some cereals, soup with food pieces, and fruit salad with juice. Be careful of cereals with lots of hard pieces in them that won't soak up milk. Opt for pureed soup rather than soup with food pieces in it. Remember, if in doubt, leave it out. It's not worth the risk. Choking can be serious and even fatal. You can work together to reduce risk, think of alternatives, and help your service users enjoy nutritious meals. Raise any queries with your team leader and discuss them. To promote consistency and reduce stress around meal preparation, you could try making meal planners with clear ideas about how the food needs to be prepared. If a service user has had a difficulty with a particular food, document it, share it with the wider team. Problem solve together whether this food could be served in a different way or whether it should be avoided and replaced with something else. Try not to be scared of dysphagia and choking. Choking can happen to anyone at any time. You can never completely eliminate the risk of choking. Increase your knowledge and skills about dysphagia to help you feel more confident. Make sure you and your team are choking awareness and first aid trained. Cutting food into bite-sized pieces 1.5 cm by 1.5 cm can be a big help, as can heating some foods. Adding moisture to food and using the slow cooker can help soften foods. If you need more help or signposting to helpful resources, you can contact your local speech and language therapy department. For more information about supporting someone with an eating and drinking difficulty to eat and drink well, please check out our other video, What Makes a Good Meal?